Good morning. Good morning. We are going to have a series of workshops based on research and on how to develop your research proposal, those who are doing research proposal. So there are some of the aspects which I want us to share before we start. The topic of today, we are looking at the elements of the research proposal. Well, sometimes we use the word outline. Well, let me start first by introducing myself. I'm Welcome Kopega. I am an acrylic facilitator at the Learning Center. I assist the students with on how to write their research proposals, and also those who are already on the stage of writing their research reports. We do assist them. So I focus mostly on masters and PhD, but I know that some of you are our first years. You are doing your research proposal for first year. We do also assist the honors students. But remember that my role is not to teach you the content, but it's to assist you on how to write certain elements in your research, so that when you submit your research proposal, you get better results out of those elements and so on. So, welcome students again. I just want to share my area of expertise. Basically, I am more on social sciences, focusing on education, okay? But I'll try to touch on other spheres of discipline or colleges as much as possible. But those spheres of colleges which I'm not good in or discipline, I won't even temper to go there, like science and all of those. But basically, my main area of expertise is in education. I'll try to give other examples, but I think mainly ones will come from the education discipline and so on. Okay, that's my area of expertise. The outcome of today's presentation, I want us by the end of today to be able to gain an understanding of the definition of some of the concepts and also the characteristics of research proposal. In other words, you start by understanding how to define a research proposal, and also some of the basic characteristics of a research proposal. Various authors, they indicate different characteristics, but I've picked some few. I think one author, basically, I think I've picked from the book of DeForce. I think that study material talks better to me, but there are other authors definitely in research. The other one, we need to understand the elements of the research proposal or the outline. What are the aspects which we need to include in your research proposal? I want to talk about the honors students. And we know that in mostly of you, how do you do your research proposal? They stagger it up, is it? You start by just saying the first assignment could be literature review. Then you do the literature review, then you submit, then they correct, and so on. Okay. Then you go to the next one. Maybe it's identifying a topic and so on, and maybe research methods and so on. In other words, by the end of the year, you submit a full-fledged research proposal, which is made of all those components or elements. But in between, you do it in the form of an assignment, okay? But when you look at your master's and a PhD, you have a requirement in regards to your research proposal submission. For example, in PhD, I know that they ask you to submit almost 700 and something words, but in masters, they ask you for 400 and something words. But remember that it also depend by the college, okay? And at the same time, in your master's and PhD, they will outline the aspect which they expect you to submit in your research proposal, which is normally submitted towards the end of October and so on. So those are the things we need to look at. But remember that as a student, if you have written a certain part of your research proposal and you want us to look at that aspect, you can also email it to me, then I can look at it and give feedback, all right? And if you want us to have a one-on-one consultation, you send an email to Mr. Hloni, then Mr. Hloni will arrange a meeting between you and me on Teams so that we have a suitable time on how we can assist each other on that aspect. Okay, let's see on how other authors define research proposal, okay? And if we can go to this definition of research proposal. If I may ask you guys briefly, maybe one or two, that just have to share and respond to this aspect, all right? You can raise your hand. I'll give it to only 2 students, okay? The rest, you can put it in the chat. Why do you think a research proposal is important? Why do you think we expect you to write a research proposal?
It's Lini, thank you. I think the reason why we write research proposals is to propose on the, I mean, if, I don't know which terminology to use, but to see if there's a need for that research, basically, yeah.
Sorry, my mic was off. This is Lynette. I think can I continue, sir?
Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you. I think it's also in a way to see how prepared you are for that next level in your qualification, how you're not really suitable, but how prepared you are for that next research step in terms of, have you thought about the topic in line with current needs and outcomes?
Okay, let's give the last person, because I think there are 2, KN and also.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I think it has the ability to show what you want to study and how, and to make sure that the research is possible.
All right, let's give the last one.
Yes, I wanted to say that it proves that your research will contribute to something new, like, solve a problem or fill a gap in existing knowledge.
Okay, let's stop there. Thank you, guys. I agree with you. I agree with all of you. And I think someone spoke about terminology. Someone spoke about the need for research. Someone spoke about enabling you to prepare for the next qualification. And someone spoke about showcasing. And someone spoke about contribute to new knowledge. Okay, that's all the research is about, in addition to all the other points which other colleagues have mentioned. Okay, it needs to contribute to new knowledge. Why I'm emphasizing that one? Because what we have picked up now, students are trying to do something which has been done in the past, especially in the discipline of education. And you find that our students, their research, and it's not contributing to anything. That's why you submit it, for example, to the Department of Education after you've completed your research thesis or dissertation. Then it doesn't add value. It just catches dust there in their shelves. But we want you to come with something which is new and is going to contribute to the science of knowledge. That's all we want from you guys. But thank you for sharing. But there are these authors who are defining what a research proposal is. I'm not going to go through all the details, but it says them, according to DeForce, it says, I think it's Kuma, as cited in DeForce, it says it's an overall plan, a scheme, a structure, and strategy designed to obtain answers to the research questions or problems. In other words, your research proposal is more of a structure. And this structure must be able to answer your research questions or even your problem, or the problem which you want to attain or to entertain, or even the hypothesis. But Liddy and Ormond, still in DeForce, they state that a research proposal, it lays out the problem of research. It also describes exactly how the research will be conducted. I think that's very important, all right? Because if we are working on the research proposal, we are bringing something like the elements of the research proposal. In other words, we are saying to you, this is how this research is going to be conducted. And that's why we have a research proposal. In your master's, when you submit your research proposal and it's been approved, already you have a chapter 1 of your research report. In other words, that research proposal, it's a guideline, it's a plan which tell us you are going to conduct your research like this and that and that, okay? But in a nutshell, a research proposal is a document that is prepared by the researcher, okay? Where you outline how the research is going to be undertaken. I think someone has spoken about that when I was asking you, why do you think a research proposal is important? In other words, you are telling us how this research is going to be undertaken. That's a research proposal, okay? In other words, you are proposing, you are giving us an intention to say, you are going to do this and that and that. Just listen to the phrasing here. It's an intention which says you are going to do this and that and that. In other words, you have not done it. That's a research proposal. How do you write a research proposal normally, especially those who are in the master's and PhD, and also maybe in honors? You write it thinking about the tenses. If you say you are still going to do something, all right? In other words, your tense there, it should be not be in the past tense or in the present tense, all right? It needs to be in the future tense, okay? When you write a research proposal, remember that you present it in a future tense. That's something which you are still going to do, all right? Now, after you have done that and it's been approved by the university and you have got ethical clearance, then you start to do your research report, all right? In other words, in your research report, you are reporting, okay? And how do you report there? You put it in the past tense or in the present tense. You choose one of the two of those tenses. It's either you write the whole research report in the past tense or in the present tense. You can't use both tenses there. You choose one of the tense, okay? So that's how we write those two documents. So what are we going to do today? Let's look at the characteristics of a research proposal briefly. Basically, it's going to, a good research proposal will help you to, the researcher to define and formulate a research question. You should be able to have a clear research question. Remember that a research question, we are going to talk about these elements in details. A research question is not a test. Because sometimes students, when they put research questions, they think that they are testing the participant or the respondents. It's not a test, okay? You need to narrow down the study to a manageable form within the prescribed time limits. In other words, a good research proposal will help you as a researcher to narrow your study, all right, according to the prescribed time limits. For example, if you are writing for your master's, they ask you to submit a research proposal out of 400 and something words. So a research proposal will assist you to narrow that, because we know that sometimes students, they like to write extensively. And also it's going to assist you to focus on the expected elements as per requirement of the college, okay? And also, you'll be able to structure your writing and the development of overall argument. I think someone spoke about expectation. Be good in academic writing. So now here is the writing aspect coming up now. Your argument, you'll be able to put a better argument. We'll talk about some of those things when we talk in an academic writing workshop. But there are 3 important points that you should consider when writing a research proposal briefly. The purpose of writing a proposal. What is the purpose of writing that proposal? Why are you writing a proposal? Okay. Obtain, basically you write it maybe to obtain permission so that you must be able to conduct research from the institution, from UNISA. Remember that when you have written a research proposal, you can't continue and conduct your research in detail without getting a permission. Okay, maybe you want to get funding. That's why you have to write a research proposal. Sometimes maybe you are doing a master's or PhD, then you applied for funding from National Research Foundation and so on and so on. They will ask you to write a proposal. A different proposal, not the one which you are going to write for your topic, but the proposal which it has also its own elements, which are different from the one of your topic and so on. Maybe so that your reviewers will be convinced that your proposal is historically grounded. It's very important, right? We write a research proposal so that we need to see that the theory which you bring in your research proposal is relevant. And also the methodology, all right? And also to see where it has been organized in a practical way. But the last one, I think one of you indicated that the issue of contribution, okay? Maybe you write a proposal because you want to contribute to the knowledge base. That could be one of the reasons. That's why I always say research, it needs to contribute to the knowledge base. Well, maybe the other important point is the format or layout of the proposal. Definitely we are in an academic space, okay? Format and structure are very important. And that's why you see as you are submitting the component or some of the elements of your research proposal for your final research submission at honors, you'll get feedback in different sections. You send whatever you want to send in assignment, you'll be corrected, and you send again, and so on. The same thing applies to masters and PhD. We always read the student chapters, refine it, send it, and refine, and so on and so on. Why? Because we want a certain format and the layout. And like I've indicated there, this format, it is not the same. It varies, okay? It's sometimes, if you write for academic, all right, in your case, at university, it's more academic, it's more detailed and scholarly, all right? We need to indicate some scholarship there, basically, all right? If, for example, you are writing aspect like the methodology, you need to cite certain scholars. If you're writing literature review, certain scholars need to be cited. So we need scholarship there. But for funding also, like the funding organization, they have their own outline. So it means the format will not be the same, like the one for the academic writing and so on. The other important point is the style of the proposal. The proposal's content and writing style depend largely on the recipient. That's very important, okay? In other words, how do you write, for example, when you write your research, when you write your dissertation, all right, normally the output which you get for your master's, you call it a dissertation. The one which you get for your PhD, you call it a thesis. So when you write a dissertation, the recipient or the readers of that part of writing are not the same like when you write for an article or a book chapter. So it means the recipient also differs, and hence the writing style will differ. If, for example, let me just bring this. You have your dissertation now, your master's for argument's sake. You want to publish it in an article. You are not going to copy and paste. Even though some of the elements which are there in your dissertation, you are going to include them in that publication of an article, okay? But the way you write, you don't write the same way you've done in your dissertation. In other words, there's no copy and paste because the platforms are not the same. So the writing will also differ. Well, there are practical guidance for proposal style, and Morton, especially in DeForce, speak about the following. You need to keep sentences simple and short. Avoid jargons, okay? Your sentences must be simple and short. We always say to our students, when you write for academic purposes, you must make sure that what you put there is easily to be understood by a layman. Remember that when you write for academic, your work is not going to be read by you alone, let alone your supervisor, or even us in South Africa. It's going to be read internationally and even globally. So remember, other people, they could not understand English the way you understand it. So you must make things simple for them. If there are some of the aspect you want to put, certain terminology you want to put in your writing, and you understand it as a writer, as a South African. Remember that a person who stays in Brazil, India, maybe in China and Russia, and also in America and so on, they don't understand the terminology. So you must make it easy for those people to understand those terminology. Let's say, for example, I'm writing something about within the taxi industry. Then I want to see, maybe understand the perception of the queue marshals, okay? Someone won't understand what the queue marshal in another country. So I need to explain to them what the queue marshal is. If I want to put also some of the terminology which we use in South Africa, especially in our townships, where we refer some of those people who direct us to say, if you are going to Kimberley and we are in a taxi rank in Tembisa, there is a taxis which are waiting for you in that section. We give them names sometimes. Sometimes maybe there's this name which I don't like. We call them Abu Makeza and so on. I don't like it. But if you want to put it in your writing, which you're allowed to do that definitely, but you need to explain what do you mean by that terminology. Okay, so everyone will understand. Then a person in a certain country will relate your terminology to what is happening in their context. The other one, there should be a logical flow. Okay, it's one thing which you struggle with our students. When they write paragraphs, you see, it's just a collection of sentences. In other words, a person wants to put a paragraph. Remember that the paragraph is made out of 5 sentences or 6, is it? Okay, not one sentence. A person puts these 5 sentences, and when you read these sentences, which you think they're forming a paragraph, they are not talking to each other. They are working against each other, if you can put it that way. In other words, there's no logic flow in that paragraph. So in academic, we want that logic flow. There should be variation, definitely, in your writing. Avoid monotonous writing. I've seen some of the students, especially at the honors and let alone master's level, always when they write, they like to start sentences by saying, according to John, according to Peter, according to Mavis, according to this person. It's monotonous. You need to vary, okay? You need to avoid to use the same noun. Avoid poor spelling and grammatical errors. And that gives a bad impression about you. Colleagues, I'm talking about not only students doing honors. I'm talking about some of the students who are doing even postgraduate studies beyond honors. I'm struggling with this aspect of language. And how to make sure that you don't submit work which have poor spelling and also grammatical errors. We have now a lot of artificial tools which you can use. Send your document. I use a simple one, which is even free to everyone. I always use Grammarly. It's going to correct you and show you how to position your sentences. And sometimes when you type on Microsoft, your Microsoft also tells you. It will underline a sentence or part of a sentence with a blue color. Then it tells you that you must correct it. Sometimes it gives you a red color by underlining certain phrases. What does it say? Check spelling. So why don't you check spelling? So we want you guys to start to write in a professional and academic way, especially at this level. Have a well-balanced proposal. Adhere to the guidelines. All right, I've just mentioned that one. Okay, if, for example, you attended an each tutoring sessions and they've taken through on how to write a literature review, those guidelines are very important. And if they say, for example, when you type your assignment, you need to use this style, this type of typing, for example, the reference style, let's say Harvard, and also they give you the spacing should be like this and that. You must follow all those guidelines. Okay, so those are the things we want you to do, we expect from you guys at this level. Well, let's quickly look at the elements now. Remember that the elements of a research proposal, they differ, all right? It depends on the discipline. You may find that some of the elements I'll be talking about here, they are not applicable to students who are doing science. or agriculture. Okay? They are applicable maybe to students who are in education and so on, maybe in psychology. In other words, not all the elements are supposed to be like this in your research proposal. You are going to go get a guideline, all right, as per required elements which you are supposed to include in your research proposal. If you are doing honors, definitely you are going to get the guidelines, okay, in that tutorial, which tells you, for example, you need to write in your research proposal, the first assignment maybe is literature review, the second one maybe is ethics, and so on and so on. The same thing to those who are doing their master's and PhD. They will give you what you expect to submit for your research proposal. But I want to advise those who are doing their masters. Remember that your submission and the PhD, your submission, they will require certain elements which you are supposed to submit maybe by the end of October. But we want you to develop a full research proposal. And the reason being this, for example, you are supposed to submit it to the research committee. And when the research committee meets, they don't only want to see those few elements which were identified for the submission of your research proposal by the end of October. They want to see a full research proposal. That's why we say you develop a full research proposal throughout the year, but when you submit by the end of October or November, you submit only those parts which are expected from your research proposal. The other parts, you park them so that when you apply for ethical clearance or permission from the university, now you submit a full research proposal because they want a full research proposal. So that's why we want you to develop a full research proposal. Okay. Definitely, the research proposal will be as follows. It will start with a title or a topic, okay? That I've just used the alphabets A, B, C, D, E. You can see there, I've started with A, B, and so on, C, D, E, F, up to the latter one. It doesn't mean that when you write your research proposal, you write it the way of you put those letter of alphabets. No, it's just for this presentation. I'm going to take few sections, I think A and B. Let's quickly look at what is most important. It is the title, right? Every research proposal definitely is going to have a title. Okay? Remember that the title, it is specific and also emanate from the topic. Sometimes you use these words interchangeably, is it? A topic and a title, okay? But they don't mean the same thing. Remember that your topic is broad. What do you mean by that? There is a document, can't remember its name, but those who are doing their masters and PhDs, if you go on under UNISA, there is a document which is available there for you. It comes from the different colleges. It talks about research. It tells you, for example, if you are in the College of Education, what research topics you can write about. I think that document is available. I didn't check it now, but I'll check it, and maybe in our next session, I'll share the document with you. But it gives you the broader topics. Let's say, for example, the broader topic is about information, that's ICT, all right? That's a broader topic. But when you break down this broader topic, you have to come with your own title, which talks or it relates to ICT. Let's say, for example, your title reads as follows: Educators' Perception on the Use of ICT. That's a title now, which comes from a broader topic. And remember that definitely everything must be precise. Your title must be precise, and it needs also not to be ambiguous. It must be clear. It should not have double meaning. It just needs to be precise. They also talk about characteristics. We are always saying to our students, avoid to have more than 20 characteristics in your title. Well, others, they accept more than 20. All right? Remember that the shorter your title, let's say with 20 characteristics. If someone is sitting maybe in New Zealand and that person wants to get an understanding about the use of ICT in Africa, and specifically South Africa, that person can go on Google Scholar and type that search. Definitely your work will come up based on the title. All right? So if it's long, it creates a problem for people to search what they want from your work. It should not have double meaning. It should just be clear. Okay? Avoid to start your title with present participle. Okay? I've seen some of our supervisors, they allow our students to start their research title with a present participle. I don't like that, honestly, but I've seen some of those topics. Okay? What are the present participle? In other words, it's where the word is ending with ing. For example, investigating, all right? Exploring. We avoid to include present participle in our title. Instead of saying to understand this and that and that, an investigation of this and that and that. Okay? Avoid the present participle as much as possible. The other aspect, definitely the first one, the title, every research across discipline, across colleges, it will have a title. Whether it's law, whether it's science, whether it's health, there will be a title. That's a common element. Then the other one which you need to include in the research proposal is the introduction. Sometimes they'll ask you to combine both introduction and background. Sometimes they'll ask you to separate the two. Okay? So it depends on the requirement. But basically in the introduction, you need to begin with something which is catchy. And also with an interesting sentence. Remember that the introduction is the one which is going to draw your readers' attention. If the introduction, the first paragraph in your introduction, it's not catchy, it's boring, it's even irrelevant to the title, I'm not going to read that work. Okay? But you must give something which it is more interesting to say, wow, I want to read more about this. It's almost, for example, if you write a manuscript, I'm going to talk about those terminology. And the manuscript, after it has been peer-reviewed and it's normally submitted to a publication, okay? After it has been peer-reviewed, we now call it an article. And as an article, it's been published in a journal. And one thing which you normally put there in that article is the title, the author, the abstract, a summary. So if I read the summary or abstract, it's going to ask me to read the full article. Okay? But if the abstract, it doesn't even talk to the title and so on, then I'm not going to read your work. The description of the basic facts. In other words, in your introduction, you can also give basic facts. Let's look at the interesting sentence briefly. Okay? Let's say I'm writing something about, I'm just summing this topic, please. All right. Let's say I'm writing something about corporal punishment. Colleagues, we know that it is abolished in South Africa at our schools. And I think it even went to our household, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. But let's say I'm still writing about it now. My topic is more on corporal punishment. Then the introduction. Maybe I'll start to say, corporal punishment has been abolished in South Africa, especially in our school, and it has been extended to our household. Even though this type of disciplinary measures has been abolished at schools, teachers or educators are still inflicting corporal punishment to our learners. That's more interesting from my side, honestly. Okay, maybe for you it's not interesting. The reader would like to know why educators are still inflicting corporal punishment, whereas it's been abolished. So when they read in this writing or in this article, they'll get the reason why teachers are still using corporal punishment as a disciplinary measures. And also maybe in my writing, maybe in my literature, I even position to say, for example, when you go to Nigeria, subject to correction, colleagues, the last time when I checked, corporal punishment is still a thing at schools. It's not have been abolished in Nigeria, but subject to correction, all right? But the last time I checked, it's still been a policy. Let's say, for example, in my literature review, I've also indicated that. So in other words, you are writing, you need to choose a title which you are going to explore it in detail. The problem we are sitting with now, some of my students, when they choose their title, especially in their masters, sometimes I've got a feeling that they are not in that field, because they choose titles which they cannot even explore. While we are there to assist you guys, definitely. But sometimes it does delay the writing. You also need to provide basic facts, maybe in your introduction, maybe by citing certain policies. Then you can cite also the Constitution in the example I've given here, because even the Constitution of South Africa, it speaks about corporal punishment, okay? And also even the South African School Act, all right, which have now been amended as per the Pillar Act and so on. So it also talks about that, okay? So you can also quote it there. You can also provide the importance of the research area in your introduction. Why this research is important. Why are you looking at this title? Why are you looking at this title as a researcher? Why it's so important? Okay, remember that point three there, where it says provide the importance of the research area. That will also talk to your problem statement somehow, because it's where you indicate the gap. Indicate your research area, all right? I've spoken about that one. Then you have the background. So in your background, you must bring your reader into your world. That's a background. Yes, you can give us an overall basic facts, but at the end, in the background, you narrow it into your world. If, for example, I'm an educator and I'm writing about corporal punishment, and I'm based in a certain district, for example, maybe at a Woodland district, in my background, at the end, when I'm writing my background, I need to indicate what is actually happening at a Woodland in regard to this aspect. I can even share it from the background of my district or my school. So you must, the reader must understand that you are not thumping this aspect. And colleagues, I'm telling you, we are living in the world of artificial intelligence. People are going to send you emails, especially when you are done with your honors and your masters and your PhD. Then they'll tell you that we can write an article for you or a book chapter for you. Please never respond to those emails. We call them the phishing emails. So don't respond to that. People are there. And people are making money, definitely. So we need to be careful about that. Motivation of the research, you need to justify in the background why this study is important. Motivate. Okay? Remember that all these elements, especially in a research proposal, you're not supposed to write lengthy. Okay? When you do your honors, there will be guideline. How many paragraphs or how many word count you're supposed to write under introduction and so on and so on. The same thing with your PhD, especially with your masters. There'll be guidelines there. So you don't have to write extensively. But remember that after your research proposal has been accepted, now you write your research report. It's where you write extensively. But remember that if you are writing for your masters, I think they expect weight counts. All in all, it should be almost 20,000 weights, if I'm not mistaken. It depends on the colleges, by the way. Then your PhD definitely is going to be 40,000 weights. So in other words, it depends on the level of your study. So if you like to explore more, it means after your honors, you will have to do your masters. If you want to engage more and more, okay. Indicate the status quo and just indicate what is happening currently in regards to the topic we are writing about. And also indicate the importance of the research, why this is a problem. It's very important. Sometimes in the background student, they don't indicate why this is a problem, why this aspect of using corporal punishment as a disciplinary measure is a problem. Why? Really, there are literature which can even give you that, but you can also give it from your own understanding as a researcher. I just want to indicate that aspect, why corporal punishment is a problem. I've seen it in the past. I've seen it in the past. In our schooling, all right? During our times, people have to leave school because educators or teachers were inflicting corporal punishment unnecessary. If you don't understand something in class, then they'll use corporal punishment on you instead of explaining the concept to you. A lot of people have to leave school for that. It's almost like a topic which I'll always argue. You see, maybe I'm not sure if I've put that in some of the hypotheses. The issue of school uniform. I still have a problem. I don't have a much problem with that. It's good. It's very good because learners, they become more uniform or they become more the same. But if a parent cannot afford school uniform, why does a learner needs to be chased away? That's my argument. Because I've seen that it happened in the past. Some of the good learners in our generation, they have to leave school because parents could not afford school uniform. But what I'm trying to say is that you need to justify why this research is a problem. Do not provide extensive literature, especially in these two sections, the introduction and the background. Yes, you are going to have some literature there and there, but not extensively. Why I'm saying this? Because still in your research proposal, we have a section which refers to literature review or literature study. So it's where you can explore and include more literature. Let me just go to the chat. I'll take one or two questions if they are there. Okay, I think someone says, I saw that there are research focus areas. Are those titles that we must use when writing a research proposal for master's application? Yes, thank you. That's a document I was referring to, definitely. Okay, so you choose, all right? You choose your research focus. Then you choose a topic. Then you brainstorm your title based on that topic. Okay, because remember that the purpose of the focus area, thanks for bringing that honestly, is that we want our students to write research which is going to add value. That's why the university have come with these research focus areas. So you choose the one which you want to write about, for example, the topic, then you brainstorm and you write your research title. Thank you for that. And it goes across to the different colleges, by the way. Okay, let's quickly go to, I think, thanks for that question. I just want to take few hands.
While you were talking, you mentioned that when we are applying for funding, we would have to write two different proposals, one for the funder and then one for the institution. So my question is, why would you write a research proposal for funding that's different to the one that you'll be doing?
Okay, remember that the research proposal I'm talking about now here, if you are doing your master's, for example, before you can go and do your research, your detailed research, they want to give you permission. Okay, That's a research proposal I'm talking about here. If you're doing your honors, it's the research proposal which you are going to submit by the end of the year, where it's been just stacked up, where you have done different assignments throughout the year. Then at the end, you collate those different assignments and they form a research proposal. Okay. The other one, when I talk about funding, I was saying that if, for example, you are also applying, let's say you're doing your master's or PhD, then you apply for funding from some of the funders, like the Human Science and Research Council, National Research Foundation, and so on. They will also ask you to write their proposal based on the funding principle. They also have their own proposal. In other words, there's also another document you're going to complete based on the funding. The elements are not the same like the research proposal you have submitted for ethical purposes at the university. So those are two different, yes, if you are going to look for funding, okay? Especially for your master's and your PhD, yes. Let's go to the last one so that I must give the other colleagues.
Okay, the last question is, the research proposal that we do on our honors level, will that be used to be accepted into the master's program? If not, then how do we get into the master's master's program?
All right, remember that your master's program, for you to move from honors, you should obtain certain percentage so that you qualify for your master's. The same thing with if you are in a master's, you need to obtain, in your dissertation, you must pass it with 60%, then will allow you to do your PhD. The same thing. Honors, there's a percentage which you need to obtain to move to master's. And if you have a topic or a title at your honors and you want to expand it for your master's, definitely you are allowed to do that. Okay? You are allowed to do that. If the topic is still relevant and you feel that there's a gap in the topic, you are allowed to expand it. But remember that you cannot take the same topic or the title which you have used in your honors and write it the same way you have done. What I'm trying to say, you cannot take the honors topic and use it in the master's and write it the same way. You must be able to tweak it up. The title is going to be different, but maybe the core aspect, it was about ICT. Definitely, we can also take it to masters. But the title now, it will change definitely. But the core, the broader topic will be still under ICT. Okay, so it's been allowed. And also it's been allowed, for example, if I'm doing my master's, then I go and research about completed dissertation in master's. If you look at the completed dissertation, at the end, it talks about future research. If I read that and I pick something from this scholar or this student who identify some future research, then I can also look at that and formulate my topic around that. You are allowed to do that. Okay. I think can you move to the others, please?
Good morning, Doc and the colleagues. Doc, I just want to ask this question. My discipline is ICT, and I have the topic that I once started when I was doing my master's in IT. Due to that, it was more education than IT. A prof that was supervising me actually declined it. So now we have 4 topics that were given by our prof, which is our project manager for ICT discipline. So now the question is, can I use my own topic, or should I go with the 4 topics that have been provided to us?
I think when you look at them, the focus area document there, the reason why they give you the broad topic, okay, and also the supervisor. Some of the supervisors, most of the time, they have funding, okay? So they need students to work on those topics or those titles, okay? Let's say those topics, if you can put it that way. So if there is a recommendation about 4 topics, definitely I'll advise you to consider that, maybe one of the topics. Because remember that if you're funding, it makes the life of even the supervisor easy, and even your life easy. Because at the end, the supervisor may also source funding for your study. I'm not saying it's going to happen, please, guys, because I don't want to misquote to say Dr. Pega said there will be funding for our study. But there's an advantage definitely going forward. So I'll advise you, consider that.
All right.
Consider
thank you so much,
that. Yes.
All right, thank you.
The last one.
Dr. Pega, this is Nomhle. I am a returning student, and I'm quite yes, I'm quite happy that you know I've managed to find your workshops. I was very fortunate very early this year to have my research proposal accepted. And then about 2 days ago, there was an inter-varsity discipline where I was, it's more like a practice run, because sometime next month I'll be presenting my proposal in a conference. And then one of the reviewers, they mentioned something, and I just wanted to run it by you. So my title, it's tracking and tracing beneficiaries of the National Certificate in Sales Representation. So the main aim there is to look at their career trajectories from training to employment. And one of the reviewers was asking, where is the setting? So, you know, they even made an examples, and I am quite aware, especially in the education space, where you'll find somebody saying the efficacy of teaching mathematics to grade 6 in Ekurhuleni, KwaThema, something like that. And I didn't want to regionalize my proposal, because with the learnership, it's a national intervention. And I mean, some of these beneficiaries, they might even be overseas, because one of the benefits is that sometimes you can even gain employment overseas. So yeah, that's my question, because it somehow threw me off to say, no, you must have, you know, like the location, where is it? And it's, for me, it's not Gauteng, it's not Johannesburg, it's a national intervention. So it's just that because of time constraints, I wasn't able to provide clarity, and the person joined late, so there are too many. So yeah, the moderator said no, rather they can contact me on the site, because it will just lead to a debate, because some of the aspects they didn't get because they joined late. So I'm trusting my question is clear. Is it always necessary in your title to regionalize it?
Yeah, I think sometimes we remember that most of the time we expect you as a student not to do research across the whole South Africa. Sometimes we don't have time, we don't have resources, and so on. So to put it into certain specific areas or regions, it's advisable, honestly, because remember that you can't do a study which covers the rest of South Africa. It's not possible. It's not possible, but you can expand it. Remember, I've seen most of the students who are doing their masters. They take their study and they expand it to other provinces after they've completed their PhD and so on. I've seen in that way. Okay, sometimes you get a buy-in from the different districts according to different provinces and so on. After you have done with your study in detail, now, because remember that it's going to be difficult for you. Okay, so it's better to bring it down. Okay. And I've seen some of my students, if I can make an example, they've done their PhD and they focus only in few schools. Some of them 5 schools. And it's been hung out. Because it's not about quantity here. Okay? It's about the quality, definitely. Okay? Because some of things can be generalized. But if, for example, I'm just bringing this quickly, I'm moving to the next point. If, for example, I'm doing a study to try to understand the schools which are still using pit toilets, for example, I can't conduct the study mostly in Gauteng because I think there are few schools if they are there. But I know that in Northwest, definitely there are more schools there. So if I'm sitting at Gauteng here, definitely I must focus my study at Northwest because my topic talks about the aspect which is happening in that area mostly than in Gauteng. So it depends on the topic you're looking at. Like you're saying, the learnership. Learnership is not only regionalized, you know, it's a national thing. But you need also to try to narrow it down so that it becomes easy for you. Not easy, but manageable for you as a researcher, honestly. All right, I think I've given that. If you want us to have one-on-one based on this, you can also set an appointment.
Yes, we'll definitely do that. Thank you,
Okay.
Dr.
Thank
Kubeka.
you.
Thank you.
I want us to look at another aspect which we include in the research proposal. I always call it a problem statement. Okay? Others, they like to call it a statement of the problem. It's almost the same thing. Basically, in your research, you must tell us what is the problem. And other colleges, they'll ask you to indicate a purpose statement. I think in science, they always like the word purpose statement, which differs a little bit from the problem statement, a little bit. But we in education, we use mostly problem statement, all right? And also in psychology and so on, they use problem statement. Or others, they phrase it and call it statement of the problem. It's fine, it's almost the same thing. If you write for a journal, other journals, they'll say you must include a statement of the problem. Others, they'll say include problem statement, but it means almost the same thing. But what you need to include in the problem statement, basically, I will say a paragraph or two is enough for a problem statement. And I'm telling you guys, whether you're writing master's or PhD, for me, a paragraph or two, especially 2 paragraphs are enough. Because if we don't narrow it down to these requirements, you end up talking a lot in the problem statement in that section. And at the end of the day, when I read it, I don't even see a problem here. And what I normally do with some of my students, if they're struggling on developing a problem statement, I'll say, let us have one-on-one. Then we share. All right, you send me the problem statement in your document, let's talk about it. Then I'll ask a person to say, tell me, what is the problem? And I'm telling you, based on that conversation, the student will indicate me exactly what the problem is. Then after that, I will say, put that in your document. Then you're able to get a better problem statement. And basically, it is the heart of your research. In other words, if you don't have a problem, why do you do a research? If corporal punishment as a disciplinary measure at schools, it's not a problem. Why should I research about it? And also what you need to do in this part of the section, you need to describe the ideal situation. All right? You can maybe give a little bit of background first. And remember the background you are giving here now in the problem statement. It could be similar to the one you have given under the background section. Similar, but briefly, okay? But not repeat yourself more, okay? You can just try to paraphrase there and there, okay? And this will make easier for the reader to have a clue about the problem. If you give us a little bit of a background first, then the reader will have a clue to say, here is the problem, okay? Sometimes in the problem statement, we can also give facts. For example, you can share a second document. Maybe you can share a circular, maybe you can share maybe a constitution of the country in regards to that problem and so on, okay? Then from there, you indicate to us what the problem is all about. But basically, those are the aspects which include under the problem statement. It should be clear, it should be concise, okay? I just give an example there to say basically your problem statement should answer a question. For example, what will be the specific problem that will be addressed by this research? For example, lack of learner safety in schools. The example I was talking about corporal punishment as a disciplinary measure. All right. Then purpose statement, I'll spend a few minutes on that. It should also be specific, concise, and precise. Clear, and not ambiguous and not confusing, okay? But also regarding the purpose statement, there are three main components. The first one, in the problem statement, you must indicate the motivation which drives your dissertation or your research. What motivates you to do that research? And this motivation, it could come from various aspects. It could be in the form of an issue, all right, which is based, which you have identified as an individual, or an issue which comes from an organization or a society. And also another main component in the purpose statement is the significance of the research you plan to conduct, okay? You can maybe reflect from the past, or you may target the new audience and expand on a particular field of study. I've spoken about that one. And also the last one, the research question you are intending to address. It tells the reader exactly what you intend to try and address. This is an example of a purpose statement. You could read as follows. The purpose of this report is to describe the main cause of traffic congestion in Midrand. Another example, this paper will describe the 4 common causes of co-worker conflict in organization. This report will explain how supervisors can use their planning strategies to improve employee productivity in the workplace. I think the last two, when you look at the last two examples, that they are related to business management students, which it's in the College of Economics and so on, all right? But yeah, those are some examples. I'm not going to talk a lot about the purpose statement, but in your case, mostly of you guys, I think you'll be expected to write a problem statement instead of a purpose statement, okay? So we also need to, in your research proposal, you must indicate the aim. Remember that the aim is broad, okay? There's an aim. For example, I just want to make this example. If I say my aim for this year, I must make sure that I reach more of the students through academic literacy. That's an aim, it's broad. So if I want to narrow it down, then I can narrow it down in the form of an objective. How am I going to reach this broad aim? For example, reaching out to many students insofar as academic literacy is concerned. Then I narrow it down into objective. Then I say, maybe in each of the contact session, I must reach so many students so that I'll be able to achieve my broader aim. I think the example is simple. Maybe it doesn't make sense, but I've tried to make it more simple. But let's look at this now. What the aim of the research? Aims are big and broad. Okay, it's almost like when you're speaking about the topic. Remember, we said they are broad. Okay, that's the topic is broad. The aim is broad. But when you look at the title, it's been narrowed, it's specific. The same thing here. The aim are broad, but when you look at the objectives, they are being narrowed and specific. Basically, your aim, they are more of general intention. They are intangible. They are more abstract. Hence, we need to narrow them down, like I've indicated. When we narrow them down, we call them objectives. Okay? Objectives are narrow. They are precise. You can even measure them. Basically, we say objectives, they adhere to the principle of SMART. They are simple, they are measurable, they are achievable, they are realistic, they are time-bound. That's our objectives, okay? They provide a list of goals that will be achieved. Objectives need to be stated as outcomes, not process. Look at this now. If I talk about the aim of the study, let's look at this one in this example of corporate placement quickly. Maybe I could say the aim of the study is to determine the perceptions of educators in regards to the use of corporal punishment as a disciplinary measure. Okay, it's broad. The aim is to determine the perception of educators in regards to the use of corporal punishment as a disciplinary measure. Now, if I break it down to objectives, maybe one of the objectives is to determine how corporal punishment affects learners. It's an objective. To understand how corporal punishment has a negative effect to learners. I think I'm just playing around that. But basically, at the end of the day, objectives are actionable, okay? If I can put it that way. And remember that for you to have objectives, they must be based on the aim. And you always put them in a point form. No paragraph, nothing. Point form. The first objective is this and that. The next one, that and that and that. And remember that these objectives which you develop here, you can also go back and formulate your research question. In other words, your research question is going to be based on the objectives and also on the aim of the study. You start to have them a broader research question, which also emanates from the aim of the study or the research. Then we have these smaller research questions. Sometimes we refer to them as sub-questions, which are based on the problem, on the objectives. Okay. I think we'll expand that as time goes on, all right? I'm just giving that background for now. Then you also have another section in your research, which you call the theoretical framework. Remember that when we're talking about research proposal, we spoke about theory, grounded by theory. Any research, it needs to have a theory. You can't base your research and you don't align it to a certain theory, especially in some discipline like education and so on, and also maybe psychology, okay? There must be a theory. I'm not sure in science, all right? But there must be a theory which underpin your research. So you must take us about the theoretical framework. So in your research proposal, we expect you to have theoretical framework. I'm not sure my student in your master's, in your honors, they will ask you to have an assignment on theoretical framework. I'll appreciate if there's that assignment also about theoretical framework, right? If there is none, it's fine, but I know that my PhD and my master students will expect theoretical framework. Why is this theoretical framework important? Because it gives a strong scientific research base. Let's look at this example, corporal punishment as a disciplinary measure. What theoretical framework can I bring in there? I think I can use a theoretical framework based on behavioral. I think it's about Skinner, if I'm not mistaken. Subject to correction, guys. I'm just thumping this thing, but I think Skinner, if I'm not mistaken, talks about behavior, if I'm not mistaken, please. But I know there's a theory about behavior, all right? Behavioral theory, all right? We have also theory about cognitive, all right? I think, I'm not sure about Bandura, if he talks about cognitive. Yeah, but you ask yourself which theory you can use in your, and you must make sure the theory you are putting in your research proposal, it talks to your study, to your research. Please, don't just bring any theory. I've seen in my case, especially my PhD, I have to borrow a certain theory from, I think, from human resource, if I can put it in that way. And it works well there, because one of the sections in my literature, it was about managing change. So I have to bring a certain theory and borrow a theory from HR, for example, all right, which you call it, it was about leadership. I think it was transactional leadership. Then I have to bring it in there, and it suits so well. In other words, it doesn't. We are saying you are also allowed to borrow theory from other disciplines as long as it's a correct theory, right? But what I've seen with my students most of the time, they think that when you do your study, especially in a master and PhD, you have to talk about many theories. No, One theory could be enough. If you talk about 2 or 3 theories, it's fine, but it must be justified. Okay. But basically, theoretical framework, it gives a strong scientific research base. It always comes after your problem statement and aim of the study. Okay. It also assists in framing your research so that you could have a better direction. You can't have a research which is not underpinned by any theory. The theory assists you there. Okay. It shows that the research is grounded and based on scientific theory. It's very important. The theory, it talks about science. You can't formulate your own theory. Okay? You can't. At this level, I don't have a theory even myself. Okay? But we can use existing theories. That's why when we come to a theoretical framework, we allow our students to use even old theories. It doesn't matter whether the theory was developed in 1802. You're allowed to do that. Okay? And how do you write this up? You describe the theory that underpins your research and indicate how this theory is linked to your study. Okay? That's very important. You don't just bring this theory in your research proposal. You also have to indicate briefly how does it talks to your research. Why this theory is important. You describe the theory itself, and for research proposal, definitely a paragraph or 2 will be enough. Then from there, you indicate why this theory it's linked or important in your research. Then you are done. Another aspect is the research question. I've just explained a research question briefly, but you need to have the main question and also the sub questions. So based on your aim, you can develop the main question, and from there, based on your objectives, then you can formulate your sub questions. Okay? Well, there are different types of research questions. I think they are covered in your study material. There are questions which you call them descriptive research question. For example, you are describing there. An example, what disciplinary measures that are used by teachers at selected high school. Comparative, it means you are comparing now. An example could read as follows. What are the different disciplinary measures at school A and B? In other words, now we are comparing 2 schools to find out what are the disciplinary measures which are used at that schools. The relationship-based research questions, then now we are looking at the relationship to say, for example, what is the relationship between gender and behavior towards disciplinary measures amongst grade 7 learners? In other words, you are looking on how this relationship, this aspect of the topic is taking place or happening according to the different relationship. You can position it according to gender and also can position according to the different grades. So it's an example, guys, very simple one. Okay. So you'll decide about your research question, whether it's a descriptive or comparative or relationship-based research question. I apologize for the font there. It's very small. I wanted to put everything in one slide here, okay? Because here, in some instances, they will ask you to develop a hypothesis. But I always say to my students, look, if they don't insist, I think in honors, you should have an assignment on hypothesis, definitely, okay? But master's and PhD, if, for example, I decide to have research questions, why do I bring also a hypothesis? Except if my supervisor insists, okay? But most of the time, I will say, use one of the 2. I always use one of the 2. I haven't even published any work where I've used hypothesis. I always publish under research questions, okay? So you must decide around that. But in honors, I don't think we could decide about it. If they say an assignment is about research questions and a hypothesis, then you have to do that, okay? But masters, definitely, except if the supervisor insists. But let's look at what a hypothesis is. It's a supposition or explanation that is provisionally accepted in order to interpret certain events or phenomena. And this hypothesis, it needs to be proven correct or wrong, and it also must be tested. Well, we have different types of hypotheses, okay? And commonly, there are two, which we normally use. All right, we have other simple hypotheses, complex, and so on, but we use commonly these two, the null hypothesis and alternative, or sometimes you call it if and then hypothesis. Those are the two we use, the null and the alternative. That's the commonly used ones. Let's look at what a null hypothesis is. It says it's contrary to the positive statement of a working hypothesis. According to it, there is no relationship, please, between dependent and independent variables. So, colleagues, I'm not going to explain what independent and dependent variables are. I think it's covered highly in your honors. Those who are doing honors, I think they'll cover that. If they have not covered it, masters and PhD, you know what variables independent and dependent variables are. So I'm not going to touch on that. But basically, in null hypothesis, there is no relationship between these two variables, the dependent and the independent. So sometimes we denote it by this symbol, HO, all right? Please don't put a 2 there, because you want to start to say HO2, then it represents water, all right? Please don't put a 2 there. It's just HO, all right? Then this is an example. Look at 1, 2, 3. Those are an example I'm giving. And I'm giving this example in the form of null hypothesis. Then the other, the null hypothesis, and the other hypothesis which we use, we call it the alternative or if and then hypothesis. Let's see what it is. In other words, in this type of hypothesis, alternative if and then hypothesis is the opposite of the null hypothesis. In other words, there is a relationship between the two variables, the independent and the independent variables. There is a relationship, all right? In other words, this can cause this, okay? In a simple way. Let's look at the first example of a null hypothesis. But before I go that, remember that the alternative or if and then hypothesis, we denote it by a symbol H1, all right? You remember it with some of these cars, né? We have the car which is called H1 nowadays, all right? So maybe you remember that based on that car. Okay, look at this example. Number 1, under null hypothesis, and look at number 1 under if and then hypothesis. 1, hyperactivity is unrelated to eating sugar. It's a null hypothesis. There's no relationship. In other words, there is no relationship of eating sugar and be hyperactive. In other words, a person can just be hyperactive without taking any sugar. There is no relationship. But if you look at if and then, it says if you drink coffee before going to bed, then it will take longer to fall asleep. In other words, drinking coffee and sleeping, there is a relationship. Well, it needs to be proven. Okay, please. You look at the other examples. Number 2, null hypothesis, there is no significant relationship between school discipline and student academic performance. That's a null hypothesis. But then, if and then one says there is a significant relationship between school discipline and student academic performance. In other words, if you discipline your learners, they'll perform better in school. But the null one says, even though you can discipline the learners, there's a possibility of them not performing well. There's no relationship. You can look at the number 3 if you have time. Okay. We also have what you call the literature review. I'm going to go through briefly to that. Basically, you must make sure that you submit current literature review, which is not old. We always emphasize that the literature should not be more than 10 years. Okay? Basically, in your literature, you must indicate what the other researchers have said or done in a specific title or topic. There's a difference between literature study and literature review. Literature study is a combination or collective of certain authors, which you put in that section as a literature study. But literature review is it's whereby you analyze those scholars' view in detail. We'll talk about that also when we work on a workshop on literature review, okay, in detail. Then we have what you call the research design. all this terminology, they differ. We have research design and research methodology. Remember that the research design is broad, all right? And if you talk about the research design, there are things which you are supposed to get under research design. You get your research methodology, you get ethics and all of those things. So we'll expand on those aspects in details, okay? But I want to talk about briefly about the research design. A research design, basically, it's an outline on how you are going to investigate the process in your study. It's in fact, your research design, it's a frame, it's a plan, okay, of your study. Then you have what you call a research paradigm, which is it's a view or an angle of your study. We also have research methodology. Students, they confuse research approach, research methodology, and research design. Those are three different concepts. Your research methodology, it's where you indicate what methods you are going to use. For example, I'm going to use quantitative. I'm going to use qualitative, or I'm going to use mixed methods. Those are methodology, all right? So each one method of those methodology, they are aligning to certain research approach. We have three main types of research approach. We're going to talk about them. There's a workshop which you call Understanding Research Using the Onion Metaphor, where I unpacked all those concepts, all right? But remember that if, for example, your approach, you need to choose one, it's aligned to your methodology. If you are using qualitative, then it's an approach which aligns to that. It's either inductive or deductive, so you choose one of the two, but we'll talk about that later also, all right? Then you, under your research methodology, you need also to tell us about the population of your study, all right? Basically, your participants, who are your population? You describe it and you share it, okay? You also need to tell us about the sample, the actual sample. Remember that population is the larger of a participant. For example, if I'm doing a study on corporal punishment, how in regards to discipline as a disciplinary measure, this I can include my population, let's say, from all the Gauteng provinces, but I can choose a specific district that become my sample. There are many districts in Gauteng, Ekurhuleni, Sidibeng, you name them. If I say my sample is Ekurhuleni, so it means I focus more on Ekurhuleni. Then the technique I've used to choose my sample, if I use purposive sampling, convenient sampling, and so on. Then the data collection method. What instrument have I used? Have I used questionnaire? Have I used interviews? So I must describe my data collection instrument. How did I analyze this instrument? Then you go to data analysis. Have I used, maybe if it's qualitative, have I used a program like Atlas.i? Or have I used thematic analysis? If it's quantitative, have I used SPSS? Or have I used Janovi? There are lots of them. So I must describe it. How did I analyze? The pilot study, also I need to describe my pilot study. The pilot study, for example, if I'm doing my study at Ekurhuleni, let's say I choose one area there, let's say Tembisa. If I want to do my pilot study, I take my questionnaire, maybe I give to one school which does not fall under Tembisa. Maybe I go to, let's say, for example, I go to Soweto, a school in Soweto. Then I give the teachers there to complete the questionnaire for me. It's a pilot study, okay? Then I use the pilot study results so that I refine my data collection instrument like a questionnaire. Colleagues, we are going to talk about all these concepts in detail. In other words, the workshops is going to be based on almost all this terminology, where in a week, we cover one terminology or one section. For example, in a certain workshop, we'll be talking about only literature review and study in detail for 2 hours. So I'm just giving an outline here, okay? We also have ethics now. You need to get ethical clearance, all right? You need to get ethical clearance from the institution. You also need to get ethical clearance from the people you are collecting data from. If you are going to interview people at school, for example, you must get ethical clearance from the school, all right? You get it from the district. If you get it from the Gauteng department, you get it from district, you get it from school via the SGP. You get also from the parents if the learners are minors, all right? Or minors, yeah, if they are less of age, the parents must give you consent. They must complete the consent form, okay? And this ethical clearance, definitely, like I've said, you can't start writing your research in detail if the institution does not give you ethical clearance. Remember that the ethics clearance you get from the institution, it has a number, all right? And most of the time when you apply for ethical clearance from the Gauteng Department of Education, they want also to see that number in the documents, okay? Also, in your research proposal, you can also try to clarify or explain some of the concepts you define there. Okay, and most of the time, if you're doing your master's, that research proposal definitely becomes your chapter 1. Okay, you also need to indicate the importance or the significance of your research in this research proposal. I think they want it, especially when you write a research proposal, when you submit it. All right, but when you submit your masters in that 400 and something ways, they don't want the significance of the research. But when you submit the extensive research proposal applying for ethics, they also want that section. Okay, remember that in your research proposal, we also want the bibliography or the references. You can't submit your complete research proposal without including the references or the bibliography. It's also needed, okay? According to the reference style which they need. If it's Harvard, you use Harvard. I know that our psychology students, they use APA as a reference style. Okay. The other thing which I encourage my students to include is this one, you don't have to submit it definitely. The timeline, it's for you. All right, sometimes the other students, they submit it for a research proposal, but if they don't ask for it, you can develop your own timeline. You're writing, you are doing your master's. What's the timeline? Then you can have something like this, okay, where you put it in the form of phases or stages. The first one, maybe where you are now, it's about developing a research proposal. Then you put the item you'll be doing, the activities, and so on. So you are able to track your own progress as a student. And this also assists you a lot so that you're able to be focused in your research according to the timeline. This one, I'm not going to cover it. I think I'm going to cover it in the next session also. What is a good research? It should not be a duplication, but you can expand. We spoke about that one. It should have ethical standards. It also needs to answer research questions. And also it should be feasible. All right. It should be doable, basically. And also, sorry, I don't know why it's jumping this. Sorry for that. It should not be costly. Please, you should not go and make your research to be costly. Yes, you are going to pay fees. Those who are paying fees, some of you are going to be funded and so on. So don't make it costly. We are here at a county. Why do you want to collect data at Western Cape? There's no reason for that. Okay? Even though you're saying you're going to collect data online, the possibility of you not getting responses are very high. But if you say, I'm based here in this area, data around this area, if people are not responding online, you can also expand and justify why do you collect data face to face. But remember that what you have put in your research proposal, you must carry it in your research report. You cannot just now change. If you change, we justify. If you want to change the title, the supervisor must be involved. If you want to change the methodology, the supervisor must be involved. Okay, I think those are the few points Let's quickly look at what's happening on the chart. All right, someone says it's hard to differentiate the research terms and they are a bit confusing. I think as we go, like I've indicated, all these sections, we are going to work on them as individual sections in the coming workshops. So we'll be able to understand the concept in detail. Now it's just an outline or an overview, okay?
Oh, okay. Thank you, sir. I just wanted to ask, Doctor, regarding the title, right? Let's say I want to go, I don't agree with, okay, can I just make an example? An example with corporal punishment, right? Usually the research is in agreement with the abolishment of corporal punishment. Now, let's say I'm in agreement with it. Will that work against me? Do you advise conducting a research along those lines where like I'm disagreeing with what's out there already?
I think remember that even though this has been also indicated in the Constitution and also maybe in our South African School Act, as a researcher, you can have a topic, all right, any topic, because remember that your research title, you should have identified a gap. There should be a gap. There should be something to research about. Maybe you want to give us the reason why this is still happening. Then you go and conduct research and find out from the schools why teachers are still doing this. And you position your argument around that. And remember that if, for example, corporal punishment have been abolished in South Africa, it doesn't mean that it has been abolished in all the countries. I've just given an example, but please go and check that. But the last time I've checked, especially when I read some of their work, is that it's still applicable in some of the countries in Africa. But I'm not saying, what I'm trying to say, if your supervisor has a buy-in in that type of a topic or a title, why don't do research around it? You can do it. You can do a research around it, honestly. Maybe you can even go and speak about this on the media and so on. Or maybe write a publication under conversation to say, okay, this is a problem. And definitely, colleagues, what I'm trying to say now, all of us, we know that's a problem we are facing in South Africa. There's no way you can go through the whole year not having heard about a certain teacher who has been expelled from school because that teacher has inflicted corporal punishment to our learners. Say it's also suspend those teachers or fire those teachers if they have that capabilities. It's happening. But I'm not saying I'm promoting that, but we know it's happening. Because maybe there are different measures which have been used at schools, okay? But what I'm trying to say, there's nothing wrong with that, honestly, for me, okay? As long as you have a buy-in with your lecturers, you put your argument, go for it.
Okay. Thank you.
We have Nomhle, then we go to GK.
Good morning again, Dr. Kupega and colleagues. So with me, it's more of a question and some word of advice for those that are joining us for the first time, whether it's honors or at master's degree. I actually posted a few books, and this is in response to some people that are asking about, learning units, where do they get the sources? Just for enrichment purposes, I think already in one of your slides, Dr. Kupega, you mentioned Macmillan and Schumacher. That's a lovely research book. Another one is Creswell and Clark. These are very easy to read, and a lot of these books, they are open source, so you don't even need to go and buy them. You will be able to download copies from the internet. And then another advice that I can give, because the research, it's a journey. And there's no other way that one can succeed without reading and reading. There's 2 other books that I've also recommended, but these, unfortunately, they need to be purchased. One is Finding Your Way in Academic Writing. So probably midway this year, once one has, you've found your footing and at least there's a little bit of progress in your research proposal, for success, especially in terms of the interim literature review, it's not about summarizing. You need to write in an academic manner. So Academic Writing by Elizabeth Henning, and then The Craft of Research by Booth and others. These are very nice and easy to read, and you don't have to be reading from page 1 till the end. There's a certain section that can be helpful at whatever stage you are at, and then so that's just me sharing. Thank you for the platform again, Dr. Kupega and Hloni. We appreciate all these workshops.
Thank you, Nomhle, and thanks for sharing some of the resources. You appreciate it. Colleagues, when you are listening to the recording, please make note of some of those resources and so on. I know that some of my cited sources are a bit old, but you should have the latest one from your side. But thanks for sharing. We really appreciate it. Let's give GK, then we close with S, then we'll be done. Briefly, GK and S, please, let's try to
Good
be
morning,
brief.
Dr. Kupega.
Morning.
Can you hear me?
Morning. Yes.
Okay. The thing that is confusing me was that you said in a problem statement we should discuss an ideal situation. Like, how can we discuss? And I feel like it's contradicting. I did not understand like that point where you said we need to describe a perfect situation by providing a background first.
Okay. Remember that the problem statement, you are the one writing the research. It's about your title. So you must give us an ideal situation. When you phrase the problem statement, you can give maybe a sort of a background based on a certain source. Could be a circular, could be a policy, and so on. But at the end, when you close the problem statement, you bring it home. Okay? You indicate actually why is this a problem in your specific area. For example, if I'm making this as an example for today about using corporal punishment as a disciplinary measure, then I become more specific. I become more specific to say the gap is that in the school or in the area where I operate, educators are still using corporal punishment. In other words, you make it more specific. The problem becomes more specific. Well, maybe I'm explaining it in a simple way, but I want to say to you guys, sometimes to understand these different sections, it's when you have written them down and you get the feedback around it. Then you understand them better, because now we're just taking them on a surface level. But when you wrote them down, it's easy to give a better informed response on that. Okay, but yeah. That's how I normally frame my problem statement sometimes.
Yeah, I just want to ask here, are we allowed to include some literature review in the background? Yeah, because I've got some question here. It says background to your problem statement. Are we allowed to use some literature review on us?
Yes. No, you can normally you can include literature. You can use whatever source you have, but briefly, because remember that the problem statement is where you want to identify where the gap is, okay, in the problem statement. In other words, you want to indicate what really what is happening and what is really expected. The circular or the policy says you are not, this corporal punishment is abolished. Then you cite that part of the source. Maybe it could be SASA, maybe it could be South African School Act, by the way, or maybe it could be a circular and so on. Then from there, you indicate what is happening in reality. In other words, between the two, you are able to see the gap. Okay, so you're allowed to bring some sources there, but remember that the sources must be relevant. Okay, you're allowed.
No, thank you very much. Well extrapolated.
Okay.
I just want to find out from the research topics that we have chosen in at honors level. Is it possible we go through to the masters, or is just the basics of how do we do the research?
NL, I think I responded to that. I responded to that to say, if Ntabi saying I responded to that to say, if you want to expand after you have attained the requirement to do your masters and you want to expand your topics which you have done on your honors, you are allowed to do that. There's nothing wrong with it. But remember that when you do your masters and your PhD, there's that focus area. If that topic you are doing now is within the focus area in that document, you can expand on it. There's nothing wrong with that. But for now, remember, we want you to submit your research proposal in the form of a portfolio of evidence at honors. That's why we want you to do through, you must go through all the different sections as in the form of an assignment. For now, let's focus on our honors. As time goes on, we can think about our masters, but make sure that you get better grades or marks for your honors so that you can qualify to do your masters. If you want to expand on your topic, you are allowed to do that as long as it falls under the focus area, all right, in that school or in that discipline. You are allowed. Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming.